Hey everybody, and welcome back. It is a little late on this Saturday night, but I wanted to make sure that I got at least one more video out for this kind of end few days of the season. You know, you never know when they're going to take the snapshot of the for the top 100 if that's one of your goals. That's something that I usually have in the back of my mind. But even if you're firing up, this awesome event, which honestly, I'm running a little late on. I might not get to it, but for those of you who still have a day or almost 2 days to do it, you get so many materials. The fact that you cash out at 720 and there's a bunch of other ones really can just boost your collection in a quick way. So I wanted to get out just what I think are the top three decks. There is a deck, as you can probably guess, that I think is just head and shoulders above everything. Um, but I do want to talk about the three decks that I've been rotating in and out. I'm playing in Logan's tournament tomorrow. I'm not going to be playing Nissa. I want to play something different, something that kind of has a little bit more of, I don't know, just a different play style. And I've been playing so much Nissa trying to grind after I lost a few points the other day. So we're back in the top 20. Happy about that, but I really would like to get to top 10. That's kind of just my goal for myself. But other than that, I hope everyone's doing well. And finally, there is a Discord. I said I would get it to you guys by the end of this week. Just shout out to Tank, who basically created this Discord, MTG Spellslingers Supreme Wizards. And has just been putting in so much work into it. We've got a lot of other great folks working over there, and he was nice enough to, basically say, hey, I'd like to get you integrated, and I'm, taking on certain admin duties and stuff like that, and trying to be as active as I can. So it just felt like a great way to combine something. Like, I could have started a whole other Discord server, but the Spellslingers Supreme Wizard is just a really great place. It's going to have this local game store type feel. There are going to be events. There are going to be tournaments. We're trying to get support from Wizards of the Coast, which seems doable. It's a lot to just bring more and more people to this community. And of course, I will be available. People have already been like, hey, seen some of your stuff. Like, what decks are you running? So you'll have access to me there as much as I can, because I love talking with you folks and interacting. So that Discord link is going to be down there for all of you to grab, and just come on in, say hello. Feel free to just at me, whatever it is, and you'll see all the different threads, and we're really getting a lot of stuff going. So again, shout out to those folks. I'm super excited to have that for everybody, because I said we would do it at 100 subscribers, and we keep moving up, and it's very exciting. So that's all the bookkeeping stuff out of the way. And I'm just kind of just going right off the cuff here. I'm a little bit tired, but I wanted to get this info to you. So I'm also going to start a little timer for myself, because I'm really going to try and keep this as short as possible. Because as you all know, I love to keep going on and on. So let's dive into it. We're going to go over three decks, and I'm just going to take you right into the Nissa deck that I've been playing. I've done so much testing and tweaking with this deck. We've tested different lands, we've tested different, brands of this deck. There are so many different ways you can build Nissa. I don't think I need to tell anyone. Nissa is very present on the ladder. There's still plenty of aggro definitely out there, but Nissa, I do think, as I said at the beginning of the video, is head and shoulders above what everyone else is doing. Now, can she be beat? Yes, I said that in my last video when I was talking about my initial Nissa build. You can lose, you can have clunky draws, it happens, but the consistency of this deck is incredible. I went 20-3 with this deck today. I've definitely struggled here and there with the build, but I really feel like, at least as of now, I've very much settled into what it's doing. So just the broad strokes, because I think we've already covered a lot of this. I've landed on Woodland Hermitage is my favorite land. I tried Refreshment Stand, I tried the Life Gain land, I tried just a basic land. At the end of the day, although sometimes your curve can be disrupted with this going off on turn 5 or 6, most of the time between Birds of Paradise, Rampant Growth, Agitators, and even Trostani, I honestly forgot that she had this ability, get an empty mana gem, right? She can ramp you. And your Primeval Titans, it's just really easy to not get stuck. And I've really come off of Centaur Sage, I'll kind of explain a little bit of why. And I'd rather just have my card draw come from my land, not from a creature that can be removed off the board, or Pixie Trickstered, or, fought by a Daybreak Ranger. And that's kind of where I landed, and you do need the card advantage in these mid-range, just like slog fests. I think I played like 5 or 6 matches against Nissa, and we were, I think, 4-1, 5-1 today. It really just depends on who's going to ramp more and just applies the most pressure consistently throughout the match, or sets up the best lava wave, stuff like that. But I just feel like you need the card advantage. You do need the card selection. So that's that out of the way. And then our early game package hasn't changed. Channel of Might is excellent. Birds of Paradise is excellent. The best ramp you can go is Birds of Paradise, Rampant Growth. And if you have another Birds of Paradise, you can play a turn 4 Craterhoof Behemoth, which just is illegal. And I did have someone just immediately stop playing the game once I did that, which, sorry for that one. That did seem quite illegal. And then Scion, I've just continued to be really impressed by. And the reason why, although early on I thought it was not that good, is that generally, obviously, it's a curve filler, right? You can play it on usually as early as turn 2. You're probably never going to play it on turn 1. Most of the time, if I need to play it early, I'm waiting till turn 3 or 4, just because being a 4/4 body or a 5/5 body that has ward and trample tends to be pretty impactful in the early game. But often what I find is you're just applying pressure throughout the game. You get up to 10, 11 mana pretty easily. And basically, you play around Lava Wave by like, okay, my board's kind of filled. I'm trading creatures here and there. I'm just going to slam. My one spell will be my Scion. And it's a 10-10, 11-11. If they have Lava Wave, it lives. If they have Day of Judgment, it doesn't. But I just haven't really run into so many Nissa builds playing Day of Judgment, although I think it's a decent card choice right now. And I just think that Scion, sometimes you play it, and like, as long as your opponent doesn't have Day of Judgment, or some crazy like Grim Echo's turn, like, you just win the game. There's nothing they can do, they can't interact with it. Rampant Growth, best thing you can do on turn 2. And the Elvish Archer's Grudge Match package, I've been super, super happy with. I think Grudge Match was a card I wasn't super excited about. But the more and more I've played with the fact that just a lot of your creatures have really good stats, like even being able to play Channeler of Might and Grudge Match to kill your opponent's Joraga Druid, right, can be really, really good. I just found that Grudge Match actually does really pull its weight in this deck, and because it's so cheap and your creatures are so strong, it's just really easy for you to get favorable fights, without doing any sort of work. Elvish Archer, I just think, has been my favorite card to combat aggressive decks, and is relevant having reach, just in general. Gatstaf Agitators, it is what allows this deck to just hyper accelerate. Being able to gain 2 life and draw 2 cards if you have Joraga Druid out, getting those 2 mana gems, although they're fragile mana gems, it just allows you to hit 8 just very reliably by turn 5. And Hermit of the Flock, kind of the same. It's like a very glue card, right? It like kind of bridges you from the early game toward the mid game. I think that it just does a great job of like padding your life total. The 4/4 body is definitely relevant. Joraga Druid, this card's just an all-star. There's so many ways where you just drop it, you play birds, you drop it, you play Gatstaf Agitator, you play it, you attack, or play your Primeval Titan. It's incredible. Pixie Trickster I'm really big on. I've gone down to 1. I feel like that's the right number. It is often an excellent card, shrinking down your opponent's Titans, shrinking down your opponent's very relevant blockers. It just tends to do quite a lot. And when you buff it with Craterhoof, it's nice. You just play a 5/3 flyer for 4 that makes their creature a 3/3. So that's kind of a nice thing. Daybreak Ranger, enough said. This card just does a ton of work. Killing Joraga Druids in this format, killing Centaur Sages. Those are some of the most important creatures when you're playing against these mirror matches. and it does a ton of work. Let me stop and talk about Trostani for a second. I totally forgot about this card. Someone in our team was talking about it. I was like, ooh, I want to try that. This thing does so much work. It has saved me in so many aggressive matchups. It just comes down. You can make the 2 bodies. Sometimes you just heal your board and heal yourself for 4. After you've done some good blocking in the early game, or it just ramps you. Like it really, all of the modes are super relevant for what you're doing, and it does quite a lot of work for a 5-drop, which often is coming down a turn early because of Birds of Paradise and your Rampant Growth. So if you have not tried this card, super recommend it. Ulrich's back in the mix. I had actually taken him out for a time. I just think in a meta where you're playing against sweepers and people are kind of vying for board position, having a haste creature that can come out, get you instant value, and sometimes go even further if you're able to flip it, is just really good. Haste creatures are really good right now when we think about playing around sweepers. And playing Ulrich after you've played a Craterhoof Behemoth, 7/7 trample, or 7/7 haste, and then it flips, tramples for 8. I don't know. This Ulrich always seems to impress me, and I felt like the 4-drop slot was kind of crowded. I had like 2 Pixie Tricksters at one point, 2 Daybreak Ranger, but I really like having the 5 of Trostani, 5 of Ulrich. Okay, Centaur Sage. Why do I not like this card? Kind of already said it. It's easy to remove, whether it's Flagrant Foul, Daybreak Ranger, just fight spells, Titans that go over it, at 6 mana. I just think the card has gotten a lot worse. It's also not good against aggro, because it costs 6 mana. I think 1 is fine. I'm still not even necessarily convinced that you need that because you've got Hermitage, drawing you cards, but I think 1 has been decent for me. You can still play Centaur Sage and play a Might or Birds of Paradise, something cheap, and it'll get its money's worth. Primeval Titan, this card's just a house. I'm so glad that they did buff all the Titans, but this one just does the most work of anyone. You're gaining life off of it. It's a 7/7, very relevant stat line when we're playing with Lava Wave. It's drawing you cards off of Joraga Druid. This thing just hyper accelerates you into the late game. Now, I'll talk about these last cards. I think we're doing okay on time. Just nice. Okay. Almost 10 minutes. Alright. Lava Wave. Probably playing 2 is fine. Like, honestly, maybe even cutting Centaur Sage and playing 2 could be good. What I've found is because everyone knows about Lava Wave, everyone is playing around it very optimally. So when you have 1 or 2, but like when you've got 2 slots in your deck and people are playing around it, it makes the card worse, right? It's also why when people are really good at playing around Teferi's traps, Teferi gets worse because people know how to get those advantages from the information that they've gained. So Lava Wave is still devastating. People will still have to play into it sometimes, right? But I've just found that like diversifying the threats, and I actually did this in Domri too. I was like, okay, Lava Wave is a way to win the game, Overrun is a way to win the game, and Craterhoof is a way to win the game. Craterhoof, just because it can come down really early and accelerate the rest of the cards in your hand, I do think like 2 is very important. But also I've been super impressed with Overrun. Sometimes there are board states where Overrun outright wins you the game, where Lava Wave, or I would say more specifically Craterhoof, would not. And just like the Overrun that I've had in my Vraska build, and we're going to talk about that deck too, I do think that it is a cheeky way to steal some games, and the biggest boon about Nissa is you don't know what cards your opponent is playing. So, yes, for those who are playing against me, you might know my build very well now. But one of the keys to her is that you just don't know. Is your opponent running a 1 of Negate? Are they running 2 Lava Waves? Are they running 1 Lava Wave, 1 Day of Judgment? Are they running the Strahd combo? You don't know. And so, in a world where you don't really know what you're fighting against, apply pressure. Like, just be a consistent deck. And when you kind of understand what to play around, do your best to play around it, and sometimes you gotta just go for it. But honestly, Scion, MVP right now, because you can just set up board states where you just play this card, and they have to have the sweeper. And if they don't have the sweeper, you win the game. So that's Nissa. And I, like I said, went 20-3 with this today. In previous days, I played definitely over 100 games of Nissa. I think I'm like absolute majority positive. I would say no more than maybe 15 losses out of 100 games, which sounds crazy, but the Planeswalker is just really, really strong. So, if I were trying to hit number 1 and I'm trying to get to number 10, this is what I'm playing. So, I do think it's head and shoulders the most consistent and most powerful deck, but that doesn't mean you can't win with others. And I do want to give other options, because also I get bored and I like playing other stuff too. So, let's talk about Vraska real quick. This is the deck I think I'm going to be playing in Logan's tournament tomorrow. I just thought it was a little more fun, a little more interesting, and like, I don't know. I don't think I want to play more Nissa games, honestly, unless I'm ranking up on the ladder. And I haven't played a ton of this exact version. I had made some tweaks, but I kind of like it. So I had been on the discard package. I took that out. Nissa's just really resilient to discard. Like, yeah, sometimes you can get really lucky and do pretty well, but honestly what I'd rather do is just, yes, I've got the Circle of Druid, Grim Echoes combo, but also Grim Echoes on Primeval Titan, or specifically Kothafed, when you make it a 12/12 so it doesn't die to Lava Wave. Excellent, right? I think Kothafed is like one of the best cards to be running. I think Vivian should be running it. It's just doing a lot of work in this meta. Hermitage, you've got a bit of a ramp package in the deck, so it doesn't really mess you up. Circle of Druid gives you a ramp spell. We've got Primeval Titan, right? And we've got the Birds of Paradise, as well as Vraska's Grub. So there's a lot of ways to make sure that your mana is pretty smooth. Very typical early game, right? Cocoon, Birds, Vraska's Throne, Merchant, Infectious Scorpion. Got the 1-of Grudge match. Honestly, with the white Grudge match, seems maybe 2 is better. We'll see. Vraska's Grub, Grotesque, right? Soul of the Wood, said it before. This card's just really, really good. It's just one of the biggest hosers to aggro. And sometimes, just being able to cash it in for a ton of life, or just have a really, really relevant block on a flying creature, can be excellent for you. Krav just can be really annoying to deal with. This actually does come out ahead of the Titans, because it's a little bit cheaper, and there's no drawback because you're just sacrificing a relevant creature. Daybreak, every green mid-range deck that I will ever play probably will have Daybreak Ranger in it. The card is just strictly better than Flagrant Foul in a lot of senses. In some senses, it's not, right? You're going to have those edge cases where you'd rather have a Flagrant Foul. But at the end of the day, when this thing is just a full-on 2-for-1, and there's nothing they can do about it, and usually there isn't much, it's so much card advantage in one card. And also having Reach is very, very relevant. Turn to Stone, best removal spell in the game, does a ton of work. Being able to nab, your opponent's Primeval Titan, their Kothafed, their Leviathan, potentially, if you're playing against Kiora. Turn to Stone is just incredible. Kothafed, it doesn't get killed by Lava Wave if you're making it a 12/12. There's not a ton of bounce in the format right now because the blue decks are just not strong enough, right? So I would say 9 times out of 10 you should slam this, make it a 12/12. But of course, if you're like, okay, I don't need to make it a 12/12, I'm not worried about Lava Wave, I'm more worried about Day of Judgment, or I'm more worried about, I don't know, them just like expanding their board, or they've got more cards, so I need to draw cards. I do think Kothafed does pull his weight. At some points I wasn't super happy with the card, but I'm pretty happy with it now, especially with Grim Echoes. Primeval Titan, just excellent green card. We're all about the green cards these days. And we've got a bit of a diverse late game package, right? We've got the Overrun. I think that's great. We've got 1 Craterhoof. We're not ramping out a Craterhoof, so I don't think it really makes sense to have another one. Crush of Worms, it just tends to be that, Vraska can slow the game down where Crush of Worms will come out. And when you get to Craterhoof before you play Crush, then you get to play around Lava Wave, which is really, really cool. And then Grim Echoes, I think, I've said this before, it's really hard to set up your dinosaur into Grim Echoes, but what's a little easier to set up sometimes is a card like Primeval Titan, right, having an army of 7/7s, or Krav, potentially, right, or Kothafed. that's a little easier. Like the dinosaur has to be protected, right? Like it's really easy to just go lava wave your board, attack, kill your dinosaur before you can Grim Echoes, or I'll fight, against some of your creatures, overrun, your dino's dead. But I think Grim Echoes has other targets. I would not play more than one copy. I just think it's a little too greedy into the aggro decks, right? These are like 4 pretty brick cards in my opening hand when I'm playing against an aggro deck. And I really want to be mindful of that because there's plenty of aggro. So, like, if you're on the ladder and you really like playing Vraska, I do like this build because it's got a little bit of this, like, edge in the late game with Grim Echoes and Overrun. And I think I've said this before. Like, it's really easy to poke your opponent down to, like, by, like, 10 or 15 life over the first, 7 turns because they don't want to give you cards off Merchant or Scorpion or Grub or Soul of the Wood. And then you just slam them with an Overrun. I don't think people necessarily respect this card or are really thinking about it when they're playing the game as much. And I think Circle of Druid, although I don't run this in Nissa because I just don't. I would rather have my deck be a bit more consistent, and I think the Druid combo is less consistent. But I think in Vraska you get like a little bit more time. She also really benefits from having another ramp spell, whereas Nissa already does that very, very well. And Brontosaurus is like another alternate win condition, and kind of does have to be respected when you see it with Grim Echoes. So this is my Vraska build. I think I'm going to be playing it tomorrow in the tournament. I'm actually really excited. I just find that Vraska has some really great lines of play, and we have a sideboard too for the tournament. So what I did was just basically sideboard the discard package. So it's going to be 2 of the Dodge Death, 2 of the Shadeborn Steed, and then 2 Flagrant Foul, because I figured, all right, there are going to be some matchups where I might just need a straight up removal spell, and I might honestly just take out Daybreak Rangers for them, or maybe I don't need some of my early stuff and I can cut that. So yeah, that's Vraska in a nutshell. I think she's really strong. I think you can climb with this deck, but I think because you don't have access to Lava Wave and you're not ramping as well as Nissa is, you're just kind of worse. There's no really, better way to... You can't really sugarcoat it because I feel like that's not helpful. This is a strictly worse deck, I think, than the Nissa deck previously. But I do think that if you love Vraska, and also if you're a good Vraska player, you can sometimes just outplay your opponents. Sometimes you get like really insane finale creatures off of Throne, and you just like straight up outplay what your opponent's doing because they can't really account for it. Sort of like Teferi's staff, right? You don't know what traps he could potentially get access to. I think Vraska can be a really, really nice choice if you enjoy it. So that is my Vraska build, and I think we are doing pretty good on time. Yes, about 10 minutes for each deck. We're just zooming right through because I want to edit this and get it to y'all. Where's Nahiri? Okay. My girl Nahiri, and yes, I named this deck Monman because shout out to Monman who did beat my butt in that last tournament. Those tournament games, which were some of the best Spellslinger games I played. Just very close, very tight. Just really a great pleasure. Monman had really put a lot of work into this deck early on into the season. I do think that it's very, very competitive. But again, I just think over more games, Nissa is more consistently powerful and more consistently winning. But I've spent a good amount of time tweaking this build and really thinking about one-ofs, two-ofs, what's the one-drop package, all of that. And I'm pretty happy with where it is. And I would say I definitely have had a pretty positive win rate with it. And it's just a different style, and some people don't really... If you see a bunch of decks that are not really respecting aggro, I think it's a great option. So, also, Emberspawn Crags, I just think this land does a crazy amount of work in this deck. I'll explain briefly why, because not everyone might know the combo. Path of the Barbarian, it got cheaper. It's way better. It actually made a deck like this much more viable. I think also it can be an Angrath, although I don't know that it's as good. Axe of Vengeance. It's 1 mana, you get 3 charges. Why is it good with Crags? Now, when you get to Indomitable Strength, right, for the rest of the game, as long as you attack with one or more creatures with 5 power, you deal 5 to the opponent. You Lava Axe them, right? Why does that matter with Crag? Crag comes in as a 2-1, right? And you have Sword that minimum, without Will Smith, gives +2/+0, so it becomes a 4-1. And then you save your Axe of Vengeance to give it the +1/+0, so it's a 5-1 fleeting haste, Lava Axe your opponent, right? And they're usually going to have to block your 5-1 fleeting haste unless they have a very, very high life total. So it just turns your, like, sometimes I'll just be sitting there. I resolve my Indomitable Strength, and then I'm just looking at, like, one creature and, like, 4 fleeting, Crag tokens, the Emberlings, and then you just play them out one by one, and your opponent just gets Lava Axe, and they can't really, and then you're trading, like, a crappy fleeting creature for one of their actual creatures. So that's kind of the crux of the deck. The really important thing with this deck, and maybe I'll do a little bit more in-depth gameplay with it because it is very fun, and I'm sure I have aggro enthusiasts on my channel. You want to be really mindful of how you're curving out because you want to get Path of the Barbarian out as soon as possible. You want to land that. You want to get to the next spell, the Mindless Rage. You want to get to Indomitable Strength. You need to be kind of curving out. And so you really want to think about how many 1-drops and 2s you have in your opening hand so that if you don't have the mana gem, you can go like Griff turn 1. Okay, I drew my Path of the Barbarian. I'm going to play Path, and I'm going to play Elite Vanguard. So when you get really good with this deck, you can really maximize how you're curving out to make Path of the Barbarian do so much work for you. So Griff, I still think is really good with the Nahiri Sword, her passive, if you haven't seen that, the Stoneforge Blade, which got buffed, I think, 2 patches ago. It's a 3/2 flyer on your turn, right? You pay 1 mana to give it +3 or +2/+0. It's just an evasive cheap creature. Elite Vanguard, used to think this card was really terrible, but it's a 1 mana 3/1. And if we do math, we add a Stoneforge Blade to this, it becomes a what? A 5/1, right? And so for Indomitable Strength, again, this becomes a Lava Axe. 2-headed Hellhound, one of the scariest openers you can have is Hellhound. Okay, attack with Hellhound, and my Stoneforge Blade hit you for 6 for 2 mana invested, right? Just can be really scary if you stumble. Burn Through. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe Shock would be better. I don't think so. Burn Through will hit some of those X1s, and sometimes it's really relevant. But the thing that matters the most is, sure, you could pay the same amount to deal 2 damage to face or a creature, but Burn Through is stopping a big creature from being able to block, right? And like, because of how cheap it is, I promise this card really does pull its weight. Pouncing Lemur, again, 1 mana 3/2. You give it a blade, it attacks for 5. You're doing as much damage as possible. Raging Goblin, also a great opener, right? Hit them, shock them for 2. On turn 1, it carries a sword, becomes a 4/1. They're going to have to block it, right, with their Joraga Druid if they have a slow draw, or their Corrosion Tusker. You just make all of your really cheap, kind of bad creatures into a serious amount of damage, and they have to be dealing with it. Same thing with the Overgrown Iguana and Cannoneer package, right? It's just you can really trample over your opponent for like 4 or 5 damage very easily. And obviously these allow, whether this is getting buffed by a blade or you're buffing something else and putting a blade on it, Sword Cannoneer, is a build a 5 power creature essentially. Goblin Shortcutter does a lot of work. It's a 2 mana 2/3 good rate, and it just takes out a blocker. It's got a good amount of toughness, to maybe trade with the 2/2. It just does exactly what your deck wants you to do. Core Recruit, just one of the better cards you can draw. It's haste, it's got armor, they're going to have to deal with it twice. And that's card advantage, baby. Nahiri Outburst. Now, you could play 2. I don't know if I'm in the right for playing only 1, but I've just found that you really want to make sure if you're playing spells in this deck, it's few and far between. Because you just need to be curving out, playing bodies, connecting damage, pressuring your opponent. Nahiri's Outburst is a really efficient removal spell, right? It's the hidden cost of 3 mana because you have to equip a Stoneforge Blade to something for it to do damage, so do not forget that. So it costs 3 mana to basically kill one of their strongest creatures. That's a pretty good rate. But you also have that through Path of the Barbarian with Mindless Rage. And I just find that, like, 2 clutch removal spells in a short game, plus, like, Burn Through or Goblin Shortcutter is plenty. That's my opinion. I think you could run more Nahiri Outburst, but I've tweaked the build, and I'm, like, pretty happy with where we wound up. So you can take my word for it, or you can comment and tell me how I'm wrong. So either way. Blitzing Minotaur, nothing to say here. Efficient haste creature, does tons of work. Sky Knight Legionnaire, this card's just one of your best draws in the late game. It carries a sword very well. It becomes 5 power very easily. And it's usually connecting, even in the early game, on turn 4, like 4 damage that they can't block. And again, look, you're lava axing your opponent with Indomitable Strength. Every time you're connecting with evasive damage that they can't prevent is closer and closer to victory. So that's why she's good. Will Smith. Now, you might be like, why do you only have 1 in the deck? And the answer is, the first one is very good. The second one, I don't think matters, right? Going from +2 to +3 makes a difference because we have 2 power creatures in our deck. So, when we play Willful Smith, we get a bump so that all of our 2-drops can hit off of Indomitable Strength to Lava Axe our opponent. But if you play a second Will Smith in your game, it doesn't really do anything. Yeah, it, like, pushes some attackers into, like, the 6-7 range, but it's not making Indomitable Strength better. And honestly, I found the 3-drop slot to be a little crowded because we've got Minotaur and Legionnaire, and so I took one of the Willful Smiths and turned it into an Inferno, and so far I've been pretty happy with that. I don't know, maybe other people would disagree, but I just think one Will Smith is good. And honestly, sometimes there are games where I don't have this, and it just doesn't matter. So I don't think it's terribly integral to the deck. The first one, very impactful. The second one, not. Okay, Decorative Armor. For anyone who's wondering why we have it, it's the same concept as the Crags. Comes down for 4 mana. You make a 3/3 haste fleeting. You put a sword on it, hits them for 5, right? You're really able to make Decorative Armor and Emberspawn Crags just basically net you, 4 to 5 creatures per game, right? So, like, on top of what you're doing, because you will run out of cards by turn 4 or 5. And then when you play Decorative Armor or you get your Crags, you just use those as burn spells. Like, that's why they exist. And if you haven't played with this card, I think a 1-of is, like, perfect in the deck, and it really can win you games where you normally would not have. So I definitely recommend it. Inferno, it's generally a pretty weak card, but because of how rewarded we are in this deck for the fact that it's easy to suit up flyers to deal a lot of damage, and it has haste, and you're just trying to basically burn your opponent down and connect, I think Inferno does a pretty good, Sky Knight Legionnaire impression. Sometimes you actually get a little bit of value. You hit an Isochron Scepter, you hit the thing that makes a creature's power 5, that could be good. I've actually had lines where I've gotten Abyssal Chains, and I play, like, one of the Crags, and I'll attack with it, and then if they don't want to block it, I sack it to Abyssal Chains and draw a card. Like, Inferno has some decent play to it. And I think it just made sense with the curve of the deck to have a 4 power or a 4 cost flyer. And I'd seen it here and there in other builds, and I really, really liked it. Zozu is the last one. Now, Zozu, I think, gets a lot better if you're playing, it's called Untamed Rage. Oh god, now I'm blanking on it. 2 mana, +3/+0, and trample. I did take them out of the deck. I just found the card, again, the spell slots to be really, really clunky. Sometimes they win you games you wouldn't have, right? And when I was working with Karma during some coaching sessions, like, the card was really, really impactful, but it just also could be a dead draw when you're top decking, and you just need to find a creature to lava axe them with, and then you draw an Untame range or whatever it is. Doesn't do anything. Zozu, however, is going to proc Indomitable Strength most of the time. And, sometimes it comes down and it lives. Sometimes it comes down. You get to Nahiri's Outburst something. Oh, wait, no, that doesn't work because you have to attack first. Yeah, scratch that. That was a Tim is a bit tired thought. It's just a haste creature that procs Indomitable Strength. I go back and forth on it sometimes because it doesn't have any sort of evasion, but haste creatures just can be really impactful. A lot of times you just want to peel a creature off the top of your deck, attack with it, proc Indomitable Strength, and that's what Zozu can do, as long as you're on like turn 4. I mean, against Nissa you can do it very early because they're ramping. So that's my speed run through these 3 decks. I do, just to kind of close out, just talking about Nahiri specifically, I think she is what I thought, right? Like, I think if you looked at my tier list, I had Nissa, then I had Nahiri, and then I think Vraska, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Vraska is probably a little bit more consistent than Nahiri, but Nahiri is very, very close. Definitely very solidly those 2 decks are in the A tier. I feel like Nahiri can really steal games. When you get good at this deck, when you really know how to pressure and curve out, make sure your Path of the Barbarian is clearing their creature with Mindless Rage, the one that they have. You're having their creatures not block on certain turns. You're getting that clutch outburst when you need it. You're peeling your haste creatures and setting up your Indomitable Strength perfectly. It's really hard to interact with. Your opponent basically sits there and says, great, I gotta block every creature for the next 4 turns, and they're gonna lava axe me every time I do it. So you can't really interact once they've resolved their barbarian spells, and as long as your opponent is not out pressuring you, because yes, you have fleeting creatures, so they're gonna die at the end of turn. If your opponent can sit back and be beating you down while you're beating them down, you do have to find a way to throw a few blocks here and there, stick a creature, and that's why Core Recruit's so good, because also in the late game it can play defense really, really well while you're hitting them with your Crags and your Decorative Armor with your Stoneforge Blade on top of them. So I do think the deck is the best aggro deck. I've tried different versions of Chandra. Chandra can be pretty good, but I don't think she quite has the firepower that Nahiri does because of Barbarian class and because of just the ways that she's able to run haste and evasive creatures, and just because of her kit. 5 damage from Chandra is a lot at the beginning of the game, but it's not a lot when you think about how Path of Barbarian is going to get you 10 to 15 damage, and that's because your Stoneforge Blade makes all of your 2 power and 3 power creatures into 5 power creatures. So I just think Nahiri's got a little bit more of an edge. Now in that matchup, I think Chandra actually can beat Nahiri because of stuff like Flame Shot. But I think against the field, Nahiri is one of the, I would say is the best aggro deck. I'm trying to be more critical. So best deck overall, guess we'll just close out on this last screen. Best deck overall is just Nissa. The versatility, the flexibility, it's just so hard to even know what you're playing against, but I really like the version that I've been tweaking, that Domri impression. Man, I even tried to play a couple Domri games just because I was like, how's my boy doing? And I think there are better builds to work on, but that could make him a little bit better, but it just feels so sad when you play against Nissa. She just does what you're doing better. You're ramping faster. You've got more consistency. You've got more card advantage. She just is strictly better. So that's pretty much our show today, folks. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Again, please hit that like, subscribe button, comment. I'd love to hear from y'all as you're closing out this season. Who knows when they're going to take the snapshot for the ranked 100? Who knows when the season's actually going to end? But for those of you who are trying to get that last minute mythic, I feel pretty confident any of these decks can get you there. And at the hazard of having so many Nissas on the ladder, I do think that Nissa is probably the best way to get there. So good luck to you all. Thank you all for sticking with me. I'm super excited for this Discord and for people joining, and we'll be getting this video out to you as soon as I possibly can. So I will catch you next time. Thank you.